Hi, I'm Alejandro with Kleinn Air Horns. Today we're going to be doing an unboxing and installation of our motorcycle air horn kit, the HOGKIT-1. Inside this kit comes a QR code that gives you a link directly to our instructions for this kit. We also have a warranty registration card. This kit contains 2 boxes. This first box contains the necessary brackets we use to install this kit. It also contains all the associated hardware and a pre-configured wiring harness for specifically this kit. The second box in this kit will contain your air horns. Here's the air horns we use in our HOG kit. It contains a small direct drive compressor and some tubing to connect the two. Let's get started on the assembly. Now what we are going to do is we're going to focus on the actual air horns themselves. I'm going to set aside all these components so that we can use them a little later. What we want to do is we want to take the air horns out of the packaging, and then we're just going to remove the trumpets from the drivers. And you can do that just by grabbing it and twisting it off. It's a normal threaded, so it's going to twist off in standard screw orientation, just like that. We don't need to make note of which size trumpet goes to which side driver because that's going to be specific to your motorcycle. So what we're going to do next is we're going to start assembling the driver to the horn specific brackets. There's 2 brackets in here. There's the primary bracket and then there is the secondary bracket. This one's a lot smaller, don't lose it. We're also going to require the hardware now at this point of assembly. This is the hardware bag that we're using, and this contains everything we need to assemble this kit. So we're going to start off using our horn driver. This is sandwiched between the brackets with the 4 rubber washers. During assembly, we want to make sure that our air fitting is pointed down towards this flat portion of the bracket. And then we're going to take these 2 hardware and we're going to install some washers on them. Insert them into the smaller bracket. Then we can start stacking our rubber washers, the horn driver, more rubber washers, and then we combine the assembly onto the bracket. There's a tab there for locating that small bracket. There we have it installed. Next, we're going to use 2 more washers, lock washers, and then we have our acorn nuts, our cap nuts. And we're going to keep these loosely assembled. Just like that. The next part of this assembly is going to be the compressor. I'm going to set this aside here. We're going to grab our compressor, open it up, and we're going to begin the assembly of this. It's got a black sleeve here we pull down This sleeve is what's going to lock our mounting nut in place, which is the square head bolt. That's how it's going to be installed on the unit. What else we're going to do is we're going to use our bracket to secure it in 2 places on this particular kit. We have a piece of U-trim that's going to go on the bracket right in the center, just like that. But as it stands, it's a little too long. We're going to cut it about halfway. You can use a knife, or for a little bit of a cleaner cut, we're just going to use some scissors. And if you would like to, you can use some electrical tape to hold this in place while you do the installation. So what we want to do is we want to make sure this rubber trim piece is directly in the center of this clamp. When we do that, we can go ahead and install it onto the compressor. And when we do that, we want to make sure that the bottom end of this U-trim is lining up with this chrome and black division right there. And then we want to make sure this flat and this flat are parallel to each other. We're going to take our leftover screw here and we're going to put it in just like that. Now see, my alignment just shifted a little bit, so I'm just going to loosen this and rotate it and match it up just like that. Next piece that goes on it is going to be this spacer. That's going to give us the correct clearance we need to install this onto the bracket. Okay, now let's go over to the bike and we're going to remove the OEM horn and cowbell cover. But first, let's see what it sounds like. What is that? Let's make it better. So on this particular bike, I'm using a 1/2-inch socket with a swivel extension, just so I could get in here without too much difficulty and clearing things like the tank. So all I wanted to do was break it free, then we'll just kind of work it out. Now I can get the rest of it off with my hand. This is a 91 Springer, and on this particular one we have a nice little grounding strap here. I'm just going to move off and set to the side. Here the cowbell comes off with the horn inside, and we got our terminal here that gives it power. I'm just disconnecting that and I'm going to leave that hanging. Now what we're going to do is we're going to disassemble this so that we can modify the bracket. So this particular horn has 2 Phillips that are holding this horn and the cowbell in place. Looks like there's a 3rd one that's supposed to be here, but I believe this was damaged at some point in its life. We're just going to go ahead and separate the cowbell cover from the horn itself. And this cowbell cover comes off. So this horn cover is a little bit different than what we actually have this kit for. This is the kind of horn bell cover that we're after. This is what we're going to use. I happen to have a spare that I'm just going to go ahead and use instead of that one. So the next step in this assembly is to install this compressor into this cowbell cover. Now, our instructions say that you can modify this slot, cut it down a little bit so that you have a little more clearance for the installation. It is not necessary, I'm not going to do it on this one, but it can make the installation go a little smoother if you follow that. So all I'm doing is sliding that compressor in there, and it's going to hold everything into place. Just like that. Now we're going to take this and we're going to install it onto our bracket. This bracket and this cowbell, they're going to install in those two hole positions right there. We don't want to forget the spacer that goes in between here, because that's going to be needed to create stability in this assembly. So I'm just going to drop that in there, slide it in, and we're going to lock it in place. With that done, I'm going to take a lock washer, seat it right back in there, and then our next wrong size. Our next acorn nut, which will hold it together. One thing to be mindful of, and it's important to actually do, is we have a support piece on this bracket that needs to be sitting on that U-trim, in between the U-trim and that support bracket here. So right there in that groove, I was lucky and I got it on the first shot. Now for this, we're going to go ahead and put a washer, lock nut, and then our cap nut. Actually, it looks like we have one extra washer here, which I believe will go right there. Now we have this whole assembly loosely assembled. We're not going to install the trumpets until the very end. Now I'm going to be doing the final assembly by just tightening all these bolts down. So I'm going to snug them up with my hands first, and then I'll go get the right wrench to secure them in place. So I have my tools here. Let's finish this job and get things buttoned up. We'll actually start with these smaller ones on the side. I'm going to line this cowbell, make sure it looks nice and straight. And because it is a square head nut, you don't need anything to secure it to finish the installation. So that looks nice and straight to me. And we're going to call that good. We got one more on this end, this compressor support bracket. Let's get that one done. The final step of this is we're going to connect the air tubing now. We have to be direct in how we're going to route it. The compressor has its outlet tucked away right in here, protected by your horn. And then this is going to be the inlet into the air horns themselves. So I'm going to use my supply tubing. I'm going to start at the compressor. It doesn't really matter where you start at. This just slides over it. It's a nice tight fit. And my routing is going to follow this path all along in here. I'm going to mate it up, kind of eyeball it, and I'm just going to trim this tubing to fit. I'm going to give myself a little bit extra just to be safe. And I'm going to cut that with a knife. You can use it with a knife or scissors. Just like that. Then we can take it and just slide it over the barred fitting. We want to butt it up all the way to where it stops. And that is good, clean routing for this kit. We want to make note down here of the terminals for the compressor, which one is positive and which one is negative. There's a little marking tucked away inside that we can reference. So I know here that the negative is towards the outside of this. That's going to make it simple for installation, so you don't have to take your head and poke all the way under the bike just to try and catch which one is which. Now let's take that and we'll install it on the motorcycle. Okay, now we're ready to install our air horn onto the motorcycle itself. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a loose install using the same hardware that was already on the motorcycle to begin with. This particular motorcycle had that ground connector. I'm just going to slide that back in there. I'm going to take our terminal that was powering the horn initially, I'm just going to set it to the side. And I'm going to slide our bracket right in there, just so it fits like the old one. I'm going to do a loose assembly here so that I can decide right now which orientation I'm going to have the trumpets going. Whether I want the long one up above, or if I want it a little bit lower. So I kind of like that look. We'll see how it is the other way. Let me set this aside so that I don't damage any of the finish. So I think I'm going to use the long trumpet on the top for this particular look. My primary reasoning for this is I feel like the slope between the long trumpet and the smaller trumpet kind of matches that V-twin engine. And I like it better. You do it whichever way you would like to. So I'm going to just snug those, make them nice and tight. And we're good there. Now, let's make sure no wires are in the way, nothing's getting pinched. And let's match the angle we want. In this case, I think that will work just fine. Let's reset our angle. And then let's lock this bracket down. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to torque that to your OEM specifications. Next step is we need to remove the seat so we can start getting ready for our electronics. Let's go ahead and do that. 91 Springer is a 7/16. And we'll just pull this seat off and see what it looks like underneath. So here are all the electronics. We got our battery, good ground. We're just going to use our pre-wired loom, and we are going to find an ideal way to route that. Let's open up our pre-wired wiring harness and see what we can do about it. So a spare fuse, some heat shrink, some connectors, and zip ties. Those always come in handy. We'll use that later. Let's look at the harness itself. So what we have here is we have a red wire for the positive, a black for our ground, and it's already connected to the relay. So all we need to do is connect these two wires to our compressor, and then this wire here is going to be our positive signal, which we're going to use the OEM. Let's get our routing mocked up to see the best way that this will work and fit. I'm going to start by connecting these wires on the compressor. Now from earlier, I determined that my negative terminal was towards the outside of the connector. So let's go ahead and hook that up. So we got our negative and our positive. Let me go ahead and cut this one loose. Now instead of cutting the zip tie, I'm just going to take the tab that locks them together and I'm going to open it up a little bit to loosen that. That way I don't have to worry about cutting my hand off and trying to cut the zip tie with the improper tool. Different ways to do one job. So I think I'm going to have my routing come up along here, link up with this loom, and I'll see if I can tuck this onto here, or I may have to disconnect these terminals to the relay, feed them through, and then reconnect them on this other end. We'll see how much length I have and what I want to do. Okay, I just finished the wiring installation. What I ended up doing is I routed my compressor wires up through the brackets, and then I made a junction here with the ignition coils. The horn trigger bracket, I actually ended up cutting the OEM connector, and then I used a butt connector, wrapped it with some tape, sealed it all up, followed this wiring, made it up with the loom, got it underneath the frame, and I just tucked it all right here next to the battery. Then we have our positive, our negative going under the strap, and then our fuse location, I just tucked it off into the side. Nice, clean, hidden away from view. Now what we can do is polish that up. Let's make sure everything works here. We'll give it a quick test fire. Turn it on to accessory, and I'm just going to do a quick sound. That was it. So it works, wiring's buttoned up. Let's get the seat back on and see how the overall bike looks now. All right, the seat is installed and the motorcycle is ready to go.